I thought in this video we'd do a walk around on my Jeep Cherokee XJ. There's a few obvious changes at the front already. I mean, I have an aftermarket bumper. I'll put a link in the description to this bumper because I get asked a lot of questions about it, and it's a really good bumper. It comes in one piece, so the mounts that actually mount to the frame are permanently welded into the bumper, and it's made out of 6mm, and there's some thinner 4mm stuff around the bottom there actually, so you get quite a lot of strength, and it's obviously designed for a winch because you can see the fair lead mount just here. You can see the bumper wraps round, but that is something I've built, and what I'll eventually do is I'll bring this bumper out just a bit further like that, so you've kind of got it coming out the same sort of width as the fender flare here, and then that way you've got a little bit of extra protection. When a tree comes by, it gets pushed away and it can go across this flare here. Mounted on the front there, I've got a Warrior winch. It's a winch with a cable winch. Obviously you can get this with the nylon, but I couldn't afford it at the time. But something I will do in the future is swap this out with the nylon and just put a different fair lead on there, mainly just to actually cut down on weight and you know, for safety as well. But I've used this winch a few times. It mainly gets used in the winter when I get stuck in really deep snow. You can see one thing I've done is relocated the control box here. It comes with this big plastic box, and I really didn't like that, so you know, I decided to run that into the engine compartment, and the control unit's in there now. I run a 35-inch tyre. In order to do that, you do have to open up the well a little bit, and I did a video. I'll link it right here somewhere in the top corner. It'll pop up. I'm building these fender flares here. These are some flares I fabricated myself. I really wanted to get some bushwhackers, but the price is just too much, you know, because essentially it is a slider and a flare in one. I've had to make like a wheel well liner. The old liner's still in there. I haven't done anything to the back to give it clearance. In fact, I've even got a mud flap there. And what I did was I moved the axle forward using adjustable control arms. So I was able to move the axle to the position I wanted it to be, you know, with regards to the lift height, which is around about 6.5 inches of lift. Back from the flare, we've got this slider here, which is just some 4mm tube steel welded to a 4mm thick piece of box section there. You know, the whole thing is extremely solid. This is continuously welded all the way along to the original sheet metal, and then welded underneath too, and you've got some sort of pillars that run back to the frame stiffener. So in the centre there, we've got a rough stuff frame stiffener. Like I said, that connects to the rough stuff frame stiffener in the front there, and to the back too, essentially tying in the frame all together to make it an extremely solid vehicle really. So you can stand on this, it can take hits from trees, it can take hits from rocks. Obviously I would rather all this gets dented and destroyed and the paint gets rubbed off, as it gradually is, than the doors taking damage, because they're extremely thin. Back from the slider, we've got the stock arch. This is actually the pre-facelift arch that I use on this vehicle prior to starting to build my own fenders. I am in the process actually of making rear ones that match the front, but I'm building a rear quarter panel armour with another one of these just mounted here as well, another slider. And I might actually then take that off, I'm not sure, but for the time being it's going to stay there. So that rear arch will be a one-piece job basically, that's going to be pre-welded to this panel here, so it all goes on as one. I don't want it separate from the rear quarter panel armour, and that's why I haven't done it yet, because it's taken a bit of time to do it. But we've got the rear bumper here. This is, as I said, the standard factory Cherokee bumper with the plastic end caps taken off, and I've built some of these end caps here. You can stand on these obviously, you know, to get up onto the rooftop tent and you know, do various things. So that's kind of what a lot of this stuff is for as well. It's not just for you know, just looking good or taking some damage from rocks and stuff and trees. It's actually, you know, sort of steps to get up onto too, so it's got more than one function. To make the bumper a little bit stronger, I ran a box section welded to the inside of this from one side to the other, so you know, you don't just have like really tough end caps welded to like really weak thin metal, like 2mm thick metal. There is a piece of box connected to this that runs all the way from one side to the other, so that's kind of like the skeleton inside that makes it strong. But we have a rear tyre carrier here. This is a tyre carrier they actually manufactured in the UK. So it kind of opens like this with this handle here, which makes a pin go up and a pin come down. So it's like a cam that pulls 2 pins in off this notch here. And as you bring the tyre carrier out to about here, you push the tyre, and then the whole thing will kind of swing round with this 50 kilo gas strut here, which I upgraded because the tyre's obviously a lot bigger. And that's basically it. It's pretty strong, but it's got a little bit of play in it. I mean, it's taken a lot of damage over the years, this tyre carrier. I've had to re-weld so much stuff with regards to the internal mechanism that, in all honesty, me and my wife talked about earlier today. We're thinking about swapping this entire rear bumper and tyre carrier out with like a Smitty built tyre carrier, like the swing arm one that pivots from here. So it just opens up this way like that, and then we can have like a sort of tray, do some cooking on it, stuff like that. But it'd be nice to consolidate that bumper and tyre carrier in one, probably drop some weight, because this is getting on for about 60 kilos, this tyre carrier. They made it out of extremely thick box section. It was really unnecessary. I mean, it's tough, but you know, sometimes you can go overboard with these vehicles. But I have to move that up. It goes in like that. I pick that up, get it in place so you can hear the click, and then the latch goes down like that, and you can see the tyres like moving around already. And that's not the welds that's doing that, it's the mechanism. The mechanism is just, it's really poor basically. So you know, I guess it wasn't designed for such a massive tyre really. That's the problem. You can see the bumper comes round like this, and then it goes back here. So it's not just a slider on the side that can be forced in, it's braced against the side of this frame, and that's frame stiffened as well. And then you've got the tying kit that slides in the back, and this is what this is bolting into. So it's braced against the stiffener and it's bolting up into the tie-in kit as well. So you know, that's all connected together. So the back end's pretty rigid. You can also see a DIY wheel well, and that's because I did a lot of restoration work on this vehicle, shot blasting the underside to clean it, and using this protective coating, which I really swear by actually. It's called Tetraseal by Carplan, and also Dynatrol first to kind of soak into the metal. And with these two sort of coatings, I've really had never any rust problems come back with my vehicle, and they don't salt the roads here in the north anyway, so I'm very lucky with that. So a lot of the garbage from the wheel well just freely comes straight down the back here. There's a gap like that, and it just runs down the actual mud flap. If you fire the jet wash in there or fire the jet wash up there, you can kind of clear things out really. And the mud flap's there really just to protect a lot of the restoration work I did round here. Underneath the vehicle I put a splash plate either side, because a lot of the major issues on the Cherokee are the stone damage it takes either side of the wheels onto the floor pan, and the kind of protection and the undercoat get destroyed eventually, and the floor pan rusts, and the floor pan's very thin. And this had no issues with the floor pan when I bought it. It was no rust, and I was really happy. But obviously I want to hang on to that, so I put this plate in to protect all the work and welding I'd done. But I put some holes in the legs so I could bolt this splash plate in, and eventually I'm going to swap this for a much thicker piece of aluminium or steel and actually turn it into a skid plate. So this was really a temporary solution when me and my wife left the UK, but it certainly helped protect the vehicle from all the rock rash it gets driving these forest roads. You can see as well that the plate extends to here, and here's one of the legs that's running to the frame stiffener, and we've got an L-shaped bracket here that the mud flap bolts to. And this is great and all because it keeps everything very rigid. It allows you to set the mud flap back at an angle away from the tyre for clearance. But obviously the downside is if you reverse over a tree stump or a log, the flap will get pushed and it will get damaged. I was pretty lucky last time. You can see just a bit of paint gone, but there will come a time when that gets torn straight off if I'm not aware of what I'm doing when I'm reversing. So you can see I've spent quite a bit of time on the actual structure of the vehicle, you know, putting in the stiffeners and tying everything in together, and it certainly didn't happen overnight. It was a progressive thing that occurred over about 5 years, and you know, I wheeled the vehicle a lot, went to a lot of Jeep club events in the UK where we went to like mountainous places and we tested vehicles out, and you could see the kind of wear that was happening to the vehicle through the frame flexing and stuff, and especially around the steering box. One thing I haven't pointed out is that the other side of the stiffener at the front, there's also a corresponding stiffener to the back, and that really has helped with toughening up the steering box area. I mean, at the front now, the steering box is bolting into about 13mm of steel, so it's pretty damn tough. And it's not just an open box, it's got cylindrical pieces running through it too, which are all sort of welded in place, so the box can't be crushed, so you can really torque the steering box down so it's pretty damn tight in there with those grade 8 bolts. So the whole thing I've put really my everything into for the last kind of few years. You know, this is one of my main hobbies, working on this vehicle and improving it and developing it. But let's have a look at the suspension setup and the steering and everything underneath the vehicle. I'll start with the front end and just make my way back into the suspension and the rear of the vehicle. But basically it's a standard high pinion Dana 30. I haven't got any trusses, any inner axle sleeves. I haven't done anything like that. I will put a simple truss in at one point, or some inner axle sleeves, just to strengthen the axle, and I probably will just hang on to the Dana 30. I have no problems with it running 35s, even when doing off-roading or rock crawling. And you know, I'm very, very happy with it for the time being. And there are some little things I've done, like just spot welding the actual caps on the U-joints, just to make sure they don't pop out. They can always be ground away and a new U-joint put in really easily. But I have put on these Artec Industries lower control arm mounts with built-in skids. The old control arm mounts on this particular vehicle are really poor. And I've reinforced the top one here as well by boxing it off and making a piece on the inside that welds to the back of the axle. So that one there is pretty secure too. But I'm running Ruff Stuff's 1-ton steering. And this was originally an under the knuckle kit. I've adapted mine to make it an over the knuckle kit, and it does work perfectly fine. There is a bit of rubbing just where the two bars meet, but it's absolutely minor, and when fully articulated I get no issues with the steering and moving everything around, and I've been really happy with it. So, you know, a big thanks to Ruff Stuff for sending me that tie rod there so I could actually do that. But I don't use Heims, I use just the Chevy 1-ton style tie rods here. I did need to then drill out or ream the pitman arm here and the knuckles too to make that possible. But it's a very, very simple job, and I'm running a drop pitman arm there. And I actually had to put a new steering box on recently because you know, I had a crash in some snow and it got ripped and really badly damaged. Nothing else got damaged, just the steering box, just the expensive bit. I'm running an aftermarket, I think it's Rusty's Off-Road, I think it's called, panhard rod or track bar. That mounts to the original location. But what I did in the original location is I cut off that sheet metal that they give you, and I rebuilt a new mount out of 8mm steel. So it's a really solid mounting point just below that coil bucket there. But at the top here, still running the stock setup with a small tie rod. And believe it or not, it's holding up okay, but I will address that in the future. And in terms of control arms, we've got Ruff Stuff control arms with a single chromoly Heim on the back of them. I've mounted the Heims actually this end of the axle on the lowers and on the back end on the uppers, because it takes out a lot of the noise that Heims give you by having that standard bush or bushing at the back there on the frame end. And I've got some drop brackets there just to get the geometry correct really, and obviously I've adjusted all the control arms just to get everything correct and get my caster angles nice and pinion angle nice, and in all honesty it's running as better than it ever has really. I've really put some time into getting all this okay. The lift in the front end is still the original lift I put on it 6 or 7 years ago, and that is a Ruff Country 4.5-inch lift. And I've got to be honest with you, it's performing really well. I mean, I've taken it all over the place and articulated the hell out of it, and the springs are just, I think they've just worn in really nicely. They're pretty heavy springs, but now the vehicle's pretty heavy and it's got the heavy diesel engine in it and the bumper and the winch. You know, it seems to be a pretty damn comfortable ride. I've still got the original Ruff Country 4.5-inch shocks, and even though this is a 6.5-inch lift, because I've put a puck in the top there, which is about 2.5 inches roughly, to bring it up to about 6.5 inches. I'm still running the 4.5-inch shock. The only thing I had to do with it was cut the thread off and weld on some M12 thread with a nut lock, which gave me about an extra inch of length on the shock there. Yeah, I mean, you know, I still run these shocks. I would love to change it out, but it costs a lot of money. I can't afford it right now. But one thing I have done is put a bar pin eliminator and welded that permanently to the axle end of the shock, just to give the shock a little bit more movement and to stop the bushings wearing out really fast. Just climb under the vehicle here. As I said, it's got the Chrysler 8¼ 29 spline, which is a really tough axle. I've obviously taken that off. I've done a bit of work to it. You can see the frame stiffeners there and the bump stops with the upper cross member for the shocks, and they're mounted, you know, at a pretty obscure angle, but it does give you a lot of articulation. It's softened up the ride a lot for me, and I actually quite like it like that. And you can see the way the bump stop works there. I welded a plate to the top of the U-bolt plate that you get there for the leaf springs, and obviously the bump stop just bounces off of that, and it seems to be quite nice. And the leaf springs are Trailmaster 4.5-inch lifted leafs, which I had a huge amount of problems with, of them being a little bit too soft. So I took my Rough Country 4.5-inch leaf spring pack apart, and I put 2 leafs in from that to make it a 7-leaf stack and raise me up to about a 6.5-inch lift with these relocation brackets just here, which add on to about 6.5 inches but keep the ride quality. And other than that, you know, I've got stainless steel braided brake lines all the way through the vehicle, you know, and I will do a disc brake conversion on the back one day. But for the time being, it's running pretty good, and yeah, I'm really happy with it. You know, it's not too bad at all. Suspension wise, I would love to put a little bit more in that front end there, change the shocks around and the coils, and get rid of the pucks and get a full 6.5-inch leaf Rubicon Express coil in there, for example. Maybe even convert to a long arm, so lose the short arms, and maybe check out a particular long arm kit and change the cross member in the centre there, and, you know, get that kind of sorted. But it's all a progression with these vehicles. It takes a long time to do this kind of stuff, and a lot of money, and, you know, if you can fabricate, it really helps, you know, with a lot of stuff. But you know, it's going to take some time to get to where I want it to, but for the time being, it's working really well as it is. You know, it's not clunking, it's not uncomfortable, it's got great articulation, really good road manners, and off-road too. I mean, some people might peg it as a mall crawler because I keep it real clean, but there are times when it's really dirty. I just don't do things with it that trash it, if you understand, like wreck the doors and bend the panels, or at least I try not to anyway, although it's got a few dents on it. But you know, I just try to keep it clean, and because I work in a garage, occasionally I put it up on the lift. I can refresh the underneath, the undercoat, the paint once a year. I give it a good sort of a bit of TLC underneath, check everything, make sure it's nice, give it a clean, you know, so it stays pretty good. And that's kind of what I've just done. I've just had it in the garage, I've just cleaned it all, I've just basically got it ready for the winter, because in a month's time we're going to have a lot of snow potentially, it's going to get cold. I'm not going to be able to work on the car till next year, so I want it running nice for the winter. So that's why you see it in such nice condition now, really. But yeah, it's working really well. But anyway, let's pop the bonnet, or the hood. I don't even know what you call that in the US, and UK we call it a bonnet. So I'll pop the bonnet and have a look at the engine bay. Before I do pop the bonnet, I've got some hood vents there. I must say, like, you'd think running hood vents in this country would be weird because it's so blooming cold, but you know, I think anything to help an engine cool off and get that residual heat out of the engine bay when you shut down is really important. I can still feel heat coming out of this now and I've been parked here for, you know, probably 2-3 hours, so you can obviously still benefit from it. But they don't really have any issues with rain. They go either side of the motor, and they seem to have no problems actually with rain with them. But then it doesn't rain here much. So there it is, the old VM Motera lump. Terrible reputation for this particular engine, but as I say, if you know what you're doing with motors, you can correct these problems pretty easily actually, and it can become a very good reliable engine. But you know, these things cost money and you've got to want to do it. I think the people who buy these engines, they don't buy them because they like the motor, they just end up with it and then they have to fix the problems afterwards. And one of the problems with the motor was overheating of the cylinder heads and cracking of the heads. It's an extremely common problem with this engine. This engine, you'll see it in Austria, you'll see it all throughout Europe, as an agricultural engine. A lot of people call it a boat motor. It never was actually in a boat, but its predecessors were, and it's derived from that kind of thing. So I've put aftermarket cylinder head on the engine, and the head is 4 separate heads, 2 valves per cylinder. The idea behind that was that they could make the engine as big as they wanted and just put extra heads on. And the other idea was that when a head went, you just replace that one particular head off of that particular cylinder and not the whole thing. These aftermarket heads are really improved. They have improved cooling channels, which was one of the major issues with the old cylinder head. The old cylinder head would always crack between the exhaust valve and one of the cooling channels. I think it was only 7mm of aluminium. And yeah, then eventually, you know, you'd just be driving along and coolant's pouring out the expansion tank out the cap because the pressure's building up, and essentially you're charging the cooling system with exhaust gas. And yeah, it was just notorious for cracking. And the old head gasket as well was terrible. You know, this single piece gasket for each head. It's come a long way since then. You can buy an aftermarket cylinder head kit for it, a multi-layered gasket of the right thickness, of course, and you measure the protrusion of the piston and the liner, choose the right gasket, get it all put back together. I mean, I did the job myself on a couple of motors, and it's a completely different engine once you do that. I mean, I run a slightly bigger turbo, and that turbo came with a 1-piece cast downpipe, much bigger downpipe as well, really thick, good for holding heat. It's got a turbo blanket on it, it's got an exhaust manifold blanket on it. So, you know, to keep that hot gas where the hot gas should be, so it gets sucked out of the cylinder head much faster and just spat out the exhaust with no restriction on a 3-inch exhaust. So you get a lot of turbo noise, you know, it sounds great. You get a lot of power. The turbo kicks in at a much lower RPM now, weirdly. I thought it would be a much higher RPM because this new turbo has a bigger exhaust fan and a twin fan at the front as well, like you know, the propeller and stuff, so it pushes a bit more power. I've moved the radiator back 2 inches as well, and I've put in a much larger intercooler to go with that turbo, with some aluminium piping as well, so I don't lose boost. The intercooler's really working because, I mean, you can't touch the pipe that comes off the compressor on the hot end, and on the cool end it's really cool. It's really good. I mean, I should get some temp gauges in just to check it all. I do have an EGT temp gauge, so I know what my exhaust gas temps are. Obviously putting copper piping in everywhere too, and running that copper piping along the front here so the viscous fan you know, can cool that down. And I've done a lot of work to it, and I'm really happy with it. And obviously I've disabled the EGR, and I've had the intake manifold and various parts of the engine acid dips to remove all the build up and the garbage. So, you know, you've got an engine that can breathe, basically, and the extra power you're getting is really just from optimizing what's already there. But I'll start it up so you can hear it. Regards to all the changes to the engine, it's not really an engine I would recommend to somebody to buy unless they wanted to work on engines. If you want to buy a car or a Jeep and you want it to have a solid bomb-proof engine, you don't have to really worry about it. You just use it. This isn't the engine for you. Maybe get the 4-litre petrol, or find one with a different engine, or, you know, if you can do engine swaps, put a Mercedes engine in or something like that. I mean, I run this engine, I've made it work, it runs great, I'm happy with it. You know, maybe one day, when my son's old enough, we do a project together and we swap it out, put something bigger in there, you know, like a V8 diesel or something, you never know. But for the time being, I'm really happy with it. And one of the major complaints with it is it being underpowered, but you know, it's only 116 horsepower standard with 300 newton meters of torque, so it's got a lot of torque. You know, it's a diesel engine, they do have a lot of torque, and around 2000 RPM it's running at, you know, its max torque curve basically. But you know, I'd probably get more power out of mine because I've put on like a bigger turbo and you know, some few other tweaks and things like that, you know, just to help out. So I mean, the bigger turbo would be responsible for probably why I get such a massive power gain in this. I mean, when I put that turbo on, I noticed maybe a 20 to 25% increase in power. It just keeps on giving to the point where I'm starting to get worried, you know. But I monitor the temps. I'm pretty happy with it, you know. And if I blow it up, I'll fix it, and that's kind of just the way it is with me. So I wouldn't buy this engine, you know, unless you really want something to work on to improve. But once you get it good, it's a very good engine, you know. It's not bad at all, actually. But that's the Cherokee, and that's all the work I've kind of done to it. I mean, there are some other things like those little lights you see on the wing mirrors. They are absolutely garbage. I've just bought some winter spotlights to go there that shine quite a range. So yeah, you really need aftermarket lights in this country because of the animals on the roads and the ice roads that you're driving on in the winter. Yeah, they're not so easy to stop on. I did used to run BF Goodrich all-terrains in a 32 by 1150 with the studs on, the ice studs, and I'm running the KM3s for the summer, 35 1250. Nice tyre, very impressed with it so far. But for the winter, obviously get some winter tyres on, and they will not be aggressive like this. But I do like to carry chains with me for at least one axle in the winter to make the winter tyre actually work. If you do go on the track. So I might get a set of 4 this year with some V-bar on and see how that goes, but we'll have to see. It all depends how hard I work, you know. So it's time for me to go home. I hope you enjoyed this video. It's mainly just on the structure of the vehicle, the things that have changed, and a bit of a walk around, a bit on the engine and some of the stuff on the outside of the vehicle. But in terms of camping gear, join me in the next video. We'll pop the awning, the rooftop tent, we'll look in the back, have a look at the electronic setup, and I'll show you what I've got going on there. And we'll have a look in the cockpit too, in the actual vehicle, and what's changed. But thanks again for watching, guys. I'll see you again soon.